Meditations on the Tarot, Letter 13, Death, Part 2. If recall is an act analogous to the resurrection of Lazarus, then what is forgetting? Forgetting outlines a scale analogous to that of recall. It can take place automatically, semi-automatically, and in a free and conscious way, according to the category of memory in which it is placed. In mechanical memory, one forgets automatically. Things are just forgotten. In logical memory, things become distant and are effaced little by little if one does not recall them from time to the field of conscious attention. In moral memory and in vertical memory, nothing is forgotten. Forgetting here is a moral act of will. Let us follow the same procedure as is the case in recall, i.e., let us begin at the end of the scale where forgetting is an act of consciousness and where it is understandable, where it takes place in the light of consciousness. Now, there is no one who does not know through experience that all conscious effort entails concentration or contemplation, and that concentration and contemplation signify conscious and willed forgetting of many things which do not relate to the subject of concentration or contemplation. One knows that when one prays the p.2, one forgets not only one's daily affairs, but also all other prayers for the time that one prays the p.2. It is the same with spiritual and divine values, and those of the phenomenal world. The three stages on the way towards the soul's union with God, those of purification, illumination, and union, are simply the history of a single growing effort of concentration of the entire soul upon God. St. John of the Cross says of the effect of the experience of actual union of the soul's powers with God. All the powers of the souls together, because of the union in the inner cellar, drink of the beloved. This draught of God's most deep wisdom makes the soul forget all the things of this world, and consider all its previous knowledge, and the knowledge of the whole world besides, as pure ignorance in comparison with this knowledge. St. John of the Cross, A Spiritual Canticle, 26, pages 204 to 205. And again, the more the memory is united to God, the more it loses all distinct knowledge, and at last all such fades utterly away when the state of perfection is reached. In the beginning, when this is going on, great forgetfulness ensues, for these forms and knowledge fall into oblivion. The memory is lost in God. But he who has attained to the habit of union does not forget, in this way, that which relates to moral and natural reason. He performs in much greater perfection all necessary and befitting actions, though by the ministry of forms and knowledge in the memory supplied in a special manner by God. St. John of the Cross, The Ascent of Mount Carmel, 3:1-5, pages 244 to 245. I may add that the masters of Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga teach the practice of complete forgetting of the phenomenal world with a view to attaining perfect contemplation. The teaching of forgetting is found also in the mystical Kabbalah and in Mohammedan mysticism, e.g. that of Sufism. Now, forgetting is the means of transition from one state of consciousness to another. Even in the case of sleep, which can be considered as a natural ecstasy, one has to forget the world of the day in order to be able to pass into the world of the night. In order to fall asleep, one has to be able to forget. Insomnia is due to the inability to forget. And awakening? Awakening is simultaneously an act of recall of the world of the day and an act of forgetting the nocturnal world. Awakening would be incomplete, which it moreover often is, if one did not forget the experiences of the nocturnal world. The night would then be mingled with the day, and human consciousness would be hindered in its capacity with respect to the tasks and duties of the day, its concentration being hampered by the haunting memory of nocturnal embraces. And birth and death? If the soul's mystical union with God is forgetting of the phenomenal world and recall of God, death is simultaneously the call from above and forgetting below. The three stages of the way leading to the soul's union with God, purification, illumination, and union are repeated after death. Purgatory is purification or catharsis, which precedes illumination or heaven, and heaven is the state of the soul when it arrives at union with God, analogous to that experienced by mystics during their terrestrial life. This union, there as here, becomes habitual, which is a sovereign good for the soul, and then it remembers anew the earth and its trials. Memory then manifests a greater perfection, says St. John of the Cross, concerning the resuscitated functions of memory in the case of the soul which has the habit of union in all its action. Let us add actions directed towards the earth. This is the motivation for the blessed work of saints. Saints are souls who possess the habit of union and are therefore in possession of the higher spiritualized memory spoken of by St. John of the Cross. They do not seek union with God, they are united with God. This is why they act, their faces being turned towards the earth and not towards God, in the name of God on earth. They act, being united with God, in the guise of organs of his will. It is the same with the celestial hierarchies, with angels, for example. Guardian angels could never be guardians of human beings if their looks were turned towards God, if they were absorbed in contemplation of God. It is thanks to their habitual union with God, i.e. thanks to the accomplished fact of the union of their will with the divine will, that they are able to fulfill their task as guardians of men. They know the divine will in a blind way, through the dim intuition of their own will, i.e. through perfect faith, whilst what they see is the earth and human life on earth. Their faces, as are those of the saints, are turned towards the earth. This is the motivation for devotion to the guardian angels. With respect to birth, it can also be either holy or natural, i.e. it can either be an act of obedience to divine will, or rather it can be effected as a consequence of a call from the earth. A soul can be sent to the earth, or it can be attracted by the earth. In the first case, it is an act, analogous to the recall of vertical and moral memory, i.e. analogous to the miracle of the resurrection of Lazarus. In the latter case, it is an event that is half voluntary and half involuntary, where the soul falls, often without realizing it, into the sphere of terrestrial attraction, which bears it to birth, and thereby it is made little by little to forget its experiences above. Birth is then a forgetting of heaven, and simultaneously a recall to the earth. This is not so with holy birth. Here it is the remembrance of the divine which is the force which accomplishes incarnation. It is not thanks to forgetting of the divine that the soul is then incarnated, but rather thanks to its remembering. It is in the state of habitual union with God that the soul is incarnated. Then its will does not lose memory of the divine. This memory acts in it, imprinted as it is in the soul's will during the whole terrestrial life which follows a holy birth. One could then speak of a mission or an election, and rightly, because such a mission is the only one which really exists. For the true mission is not what the human being proposes to do on the earth according to his tastes, his interests, and even his ideals, but rather what God wants him to do. Arbitrary missions, although due to the best intentions in the world, have only contributed confusion to human history. It is to these inopportune missions that we owe many crises upsetting the life of mankind's living traditions, interrupting, in the guise of passing comets, the peaceful and constructive flow of true progress. A true mission on the earth serves the cause of the ennoblement and spiritualization of that which is, i.e. of what lives as tradition. It brings an impulse affecting the rejuvenation and intensification of tradition. Arbitrary missions, on the contrary, aim at revolutionizing the course of mankind's history and substituting specific innovations for what lives as tradition. In pushing this to the extreme, one could say, a true mission brings to greater perfection everything human on the earth, the family, civilization, culture, religion, etc., whilst arbitrary missions can result in summoning the intervention of Martians or Venusians so that they rule affairs on the earth. Now, birth, awakening, and recall, on the one hand, and death, falling asleep and forgetting, on the other hand, constitute, so to say, the two pillar forces of reality. They manifest in remembering and forgetting, in the rhythm of sleeping and waking, and in that of birth and death, as well as in the respiration of organisms, in the circulation of blood, and in alimentation. They are the yes and no in every domain, mental, psychic, and physical. The gospel maxim, "Let what you say be simply yes or no, anything more than this comes from evil," Matthew 5:37, reveals its significance in this context. The yes and the no, this is the essential of reality, i.e. the truth, pure and simple, whilst the surplus comes from evil, i.e. it belongs to the sphere of the serpent. For the serpent of Genesis has his own word, the word which is the surplus over yes and no. He is in possession of a third term. And here we return to the question that we posed at the beginning of this letter, namely, has the serpent, having said, "You will not die," simply told a lie, or has he stated a truth from the range of truths proper to the domain of the serpent? In other words, what is the surplus that the serpent adds to the yes and no understood as life and death? If you accept, dear unknown friend, what we have said in the preceding letters on the difference in principle that there is between life and electricity, between the principle of the Virgin and that of the serpent, you will certainly be able to penetrate more deeply the secret of the surplus offered and promised by the serpent to humanity concerning the yes and no understood as life and death. Here is this secret. The serpent offers and promises such a crystallization, according to the principle of unfoldment, that the human being will resist death and become, so to say, death-proof, immune to death. This crystallization is effected through friction, i.e. by the electrical energy which is produced by the struggle between yes and no in man. Without doubt you know, dear unknown friend, that there are schools, occult or other, which teach and practice crystallization, and that there are other schools which teach and practice radiation, i.e. the complete decrystallization of the human being and his transformation into a sun, into a center of radiation. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father, Matthew 13:43. This is the practical aim of schools of radiation, to which that of Christian Hermeticism belongs. The schools of crystallization are quite numerous and widespread. There are those which are entirely secret, with very serious intentions. There are also those which are known in the guise of almost popular movements for health, rejuvenation, and longevity. I shall not speak here of the practices of entirely secret schools, the secret not being mine, but that of others. Also, I shall not speak about the almost popular movement, because it will certainly be easy to understand their aim and methods after having understood the aim and method of an occult school that I have chosen as an illustrative example. I have chosen this particular occult school as an example because it is something between the secret schools and the almost popular movements, and because it has itself taken the decision to show itself in broad daylight, thus authorizing me to speak of it and to cite its documents, accessible to everyone. I have in mind the school of G.I. Gurdjieff, and I am going to cite the work In Search of the Miraculous by p.2. Now, the following is the teaching of Gurdjieff, such as it has been understood and formulated by Ouspensky concerning the practical task of survival. Quote, "On one occasion, at one of these meetings, someone asked about the possibility of reincarnation and whether it was possible to believe in cases of communication with the dead. 'Many things are possible,' said Gurdjieff, 'but it is necessary to understand that man's being, both in life and after death, if it does exist after death, may be very different in quality. The man-machine, with whom everything depends upon external influences, with whom everything happens, who is now one, the next moment another, and the next moment a third, has no future of any kind. He is buried, and that is all. Dust returns to dust. This applies to him. In order to be able to speak of any kind of future life, there must be a certain crystallization, a certain fusion of man's inner qualities, a certain independence of external influences. If there is anything in a man able to resist external influences, then this very thing itself may also be able to resist the death of the physical body. But even if something survives, its future can be very varied. In certain cases of fuller crystallization, what people call reincarnation may be possible after death, and in other cases, what people call existence on the other side. In both cases, it is the continuation of life in the astral body, or with the help of the astral body. You know what the expression astral body means. But the systems with which you are acquainted and which use this expression state that all men have an astral body. This is quite wrong. What may be called the astral body is obtained by means of fusion, that is, by means of a terribly hard inner work and struggle. Man is not born with it, and only very few men acquire an astral body. If it is formed, it may continue to live after the death of the physical body, and it may be born again in another physical body. Fusion, inner unity, is obtained by means of friction, by the struggle between yes and no in man. If a man lives without inner struggle, if everything happens in him without opposition, if he goes wherever he is drawn or wherever the wind blows, he will remain such as he is. But if a struggle begins in him, and particularly if there is a definite line in this struggle, then, gradually, permanent traits begin to form themselves. He begins to crystallize. Crystallization is possible on any foundations. Take, for example, a brigand, a really good, genuine brigand. I knew such brigands in the Caucasus. He will stand with a rifle behind a stone by the roadside for 8 hours without stirring. Could you do this? All the time, mind you, a struggle is going on in him. He is thirsty and hot, and flies are biting him, but he stands still. Another is a monk. He is afraid of the devil. All night long he beats his head on the floor and prays. Thus crystallization is achieved. Such people can become immortal. P.d. Ouspensky, In Search of the Miraculous, pages 31 to 32. Let us now take account of the essential points in the quoted text. Firstly, it is the physical body which gives birth to what is called in the quotation the astral body, which will be the bearer of survival. Then, according to the text, immortality is neither a birthright of the human soul nor a gift of divine grace. It is made by means of the crystallization of a new body within the physical body, which can resist death and survive the destruction of the physical body. That is to say, the soul created by God does not exist. It must be created by the human being from within the human physical body. Thus it is a quantity of energy crystallized within the human physical body and engendered through this latter, produced by friction or the struggle between yes and no in man. For both the robber and the monk, and also the occultist, can become immortal through the energy that they produce by their efforts. It is a matter of a plan of construction from within the physical body, of a tower or a house of 4 rooms or levels, Ouspensky, Ibid, page 44, rising from the sphere of mortality to that of immortality, from earth to heaven. Now, the Bible knows of the method of building a tower with its top in the heaven, and of making a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Genesis 11:4. It is the ideal and millennial-old method of construction of the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is a very ancient method. The following is what Gurdjieff says about it. According to an ancient teaching, traces of which may be found in many systems, old and new, a man who has attained the full development possible for man, a man in the full sense of the word, consists of 4 bodies. These 4 bodies are composed of substances which gradually become finer and finer, mutually interpenetrate one another, and form 4 independent organisms, standing in a definite relationship to one another, but capable of independent action. The reason why it is possible for 4 bodies to exist is that the human organism, that is, the physical body, has such a complex organization that, under certain conditions, a new independent organism can grow in it, affording a much more convenient and responsive instrument for the activity of consciousness than the physical body. In this second body, under certain conditions, a third body can grow, again having characteristics of its own. In the third body, under certain conditions, a fourth can grow, which differs as much from the third as the third differs from the second, and the second from the first. Page 40. An Eastern teaching describes the functions of the four bodies, their gradual growth, and the conditions of this growth in the following way. Let us imagine a vessel or a retort filled with various metallic powders. The powders are not in any way connected with each other, and every accidental change in the position of the retort changes the relative position of the powders. It is impossible to stabilize the interrelation of powders in a state of mechanical mixture. But the powders may be fused. The nature of the powders makes this possible. To do this, a special kind of fire must be lighted under the retort, which, by heating and melting the powders, finally fuses them together. Fused in this way, the powders will be in the state of a chemical compound. The contents of the retort have become individual. This is a picture of the formation of the second body. The fire by means of which fusion is attained is produced by friction, which in its turn is produced in man by the struggle between yes and no. The process of imparting new properties to the alloy corresponds to the process of the formation of the third body. The process of fixing these acquired properties corresponds to the process of the formation of the fourth body. And only the man who possesses four fully developed bodies can be called a man, in the full sense of the word. This man possesses many properties which ordinary man does not possess. One of these properties is immortality. P.d. Ouspensky, In Search of the Miraculous, pages 40, 43 to 44. Now, the special fire lit under the retort is due to friction, which is, in its turn, the product of the struggle between yes and no. This fire is therefore what we understand by electricity. It is therefore thanks to electricity, or energy produced by friction, that the process of crystallization works. The architects of the Tower of Babel also made use of fire for the preparation of its materials of construction. Come, let us make bricks, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and bitumen for mortar. Genesis 11:3. The essence of the method of construction of the Tower of Babel is inverse crystallization. Normal crystallization, the stone, is the final state of the process of transition from the gaseous to the liquid state and from the liquid to the solid state. Thus vapor becomes water or liquid, and water becomes ice. Ice is crystallized vapor. Similarly, a general but warm intention becomes a current of discursive thought which, in its turn, results in a well-defined formula. Or in still other terms, the spiritual becomes psychic, and the psychic becomes corporeal. The process of normal crystallization is therefore one of concretization from above, below, from the spirit above to the soul to the body. The process of crystallization, designated as the construction of the Tower of Babel, takes place in contrast from below above, from the body below to the soul to the spirit. With regard to this latter process, it is a matter of transformation into body of the psychic and spiritual, and it is thus that one can conquer death and realize immortality, corporeal immortality. For if the spiritual and the psychic, in becoming corporeal, become mortal, would it not be possible that the corporeal, in rising to the psychic and spiritual, becomes immortal? Is this scheme realizable, or is it simply an illusion, pure and simple? Although this question belongs to the framework of problems of the 16th major arcanum of the Tarot, and although it will be treated in the 16th letter, let us nonetheless consider some facts with a view to coming to an answer. The facts that I have in mind are those of corporeal survival, i.e., physical manifestations that one attributes, rightly or wrongly, to dead people or to ghosts. Ghosts exist. This is not a question of belief, it is a matter of fact. There is an immense literature, without speaking of facts that one can find in the sphere of personal experience, which bears witness to the existence of ghosts. Now it is no longer a matter of believing or denying. Now it is a matter only of understanding and explaining. Ghosts exist, therefore. Thus it happens from time to time after someone's death that this person or something of him, or similar to him, manifests in an outward and physical way, noises, movements, etc., in the guise of an active energy. It is as if a certain quantity of energy, freed through death, but remaining condensed and not dispersed, manifests as an entity or as an individual body. An analysis of the manifestations of ghosts has enabled me to extract from them the following characteristic traits. 1. A ghost is an entity made up of psychophysiological electrical energy with an inferior consciousness in comparison with that of a normal human person. 2. The consciousness which is revealed by the actions of a ghost and by its way of acting in general is very limited and extremely specialized. One is tempted to characterize it as maniacal, since it manifests itself as the crystallization of a single passion, a single habit, or a single fixed idea. 3. The energy of which the ghost is constituted becomes weakened with time, provided that it is not nourished by an affirmative and favorable attitude from its human entourage. It fades away. One can make it disappear through the church ritual of exorcism, or by individual prayer, or lastly by a special action which demands courage, and which consists in clasping and breathing in the ghost, in such a way as to receive into oneself and of oneself to make the electrical energy of the ghost dissipate. I dare not recommend this latter method, because it entails the experience of an electric shock, which can be excessive, at the moment when the energy of the ghost passes into your organism. I may add, however, that it is this experience of an electric shock which gives absolute certainty with respect to the electrical nature of the body of the ghost. At the same time, it can also supply proof, in the inner forum of consciousness, it goes without saying, that the ghost is not the soul of the departed one, and that it is a burden to him, being bound to the soul of the departed by a heavy link of responsibility. In the case that I have mentioned, soon after the dissipation of the ghost's electrical energy through its reception into oneself, the departed one hastens to make acknowledgment of his gratitude by means of a very vivid and clear dream for his deliverance from this heavy burden. What, then, is a ghost? It is exactly what Gurdjieff teaches concerning the product of psychic crystallization effected from within the physical body, and which can resist the death of the latter. This is the astral body of which Gurdjieff said that if it is formed it may continue to live after the death of the physical body. If it is not reborn, then in the course of time it also dies. It is not immortal, but it can live long after the death of the physical body. Ouspensky in the work above cited, page 32. Of course, the astral body spoken of by Gurdjieff has nothing to do with the astral body of Hermeticism, which latter is, truth to tell, simply the totality of the soul's psychic memories. A ghost is always constituted as a consequence of crystallization, i.e. crystallization of a desire, a passion, or a purpose of great intensity, which produces a complex of energy in the human being. Thus, a genuine brigand who stands with a rifle behind a stone by the roadside for 8 hours without stirring, or a monk who is afraid of the devil, and all night long he beats his head on the floor and prays, Ouspensky in the work above, page 32, in fact crystallize within them a complex of energy, a psychoelectrical double, which would be able, as a dense complex, to resist death. And the same thing that happens with human beings who are possessed by strong desires, passions, and intentions can be achieved methodically by making use of the scientific method of the construction of the Tower of Babel. Then one could not only animate the double crystallized from a desire, a passion, or a dominant intention, but also equip it with an intellectual apparatus of very developed functioning and a mechanical memory in which all the facts of experience on the physical plane are accumulated. The self of such an occultist would then be allied to this double, who is the bearer of his memory and intellect, and could incarnate himself anew, avoiding purgatory and the whole path of purification, illumination, and union, which is the lot of the human soul after death. It is therefore not purely and simply a matter of an illusion in the case of the ideal and method of the construction of the Tower of Babel. Rather, it is a matter of another kind of immortality, notably that which the serpent of Genesis had in mind when he said, "You will not die if you eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." For the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil produces the inner friction in man of the struggle between yes and no. And this friction in its turn produces the electrical fire which affects the crystallization whose product will resist death. This is the meaning of the promise, or rather the program, of the serpent. This program underlies the millennial-old method of the construction of the Tower of Babel, and it constitutes the esoteric kernel or the hidden secret of materialistic science in general. We have chosen Gurdjieff and Ouspensky to exemplify the ideal and the method of the construction of the Tower of Babel. But Gurdjieff, being openly materialistic in the true sense of this word, and being deprived of all mystical sense, only spoke on behalf of the multitude. All he did was to give forth clearly what animates and impels, in an unconscious or semi-conscious way, millions and millions of scientists devoted to the cause of longevity, i.e. to the victory over death through human science, without God and without mysticism, the universal cause of the construction of the Tower of Babel. Gurdjieff is simply a representative of the cause of materialistic science. He knew what it wants in reality, and he also knew what he wanted himself. He was, moreover, a good-natured man, endowed with an exquisite sense of humour, a good son, a good friend, and very intelligent with respect to common sense, to indicate only the qualities that he possessed which leap out at one. It would therefore be wrong to see in him a prophet of darkness, or an instrument of a special satanic mission. No, he was simply a good representative of the wisdom of this world, i.e. of good sense and empirical experience, without any mystical inclination. Gurdjieff was not any more a Satanist than the celebrated Russian physiologist Pavlov, or any other representative of materialistic science. Assuredly, his practical and theoretical teaching of crystallization from below above is not compatible either with Carl Jung's process of individuation, or with Christian Hermeticism, or with the Kabbalah. For Hermeticism also teaches a crystallization, but it is a crystallization from above below, i.e. the crystallization of which Hermeticism itself, insofar as it is philosophy and knowledge, is the product. Crystallized mysticism being gnosis, crystallized gnosis being magic, and crystallized magic being this philosophy and knowledge which passes under the name of Hermeticism. Thus, if one disregards the intermediary stages, one could say that Hermeticism is crystallized mysticism, whilst Gurdjieff's materialistic occultism replaces and abolishes mysticism by crystallized materialistic science.